Let's talk about what I read in April. April was kind of a shit show. I, like everyone else, have been finding this pandemic very stressful. And so I have a hard time motivating myself to read or film or do anything that is worthwhile. But I ended up finishing a ton of comic books. Like, that has been my salvation. That is all I've been reading lately. I've just been like demolishing comic book series. I think I finished like 4 or 5 different series. In total, I think I read about 200 issues of different comic books throughout the month of April. I also just listened to about 80 episodes of My Favorite Murder because I'm addicted. I'm not going to talk about my thoughts on comics right now because I do have a couple videos that I would like to film more about comics, because I find that when I include them in wrap-ups, they just kind of get like lost in the shuffle. So I am just going to talk about the 8 books that I read in April beyond comics, which honestly is still what I aim for. I aim to read 8 books in a month, so 8 books plus a bunch of comic books isn't too bad. The first book I finished in April was Magic for Liars by Sarah Gailey. I feel like I'm going to be terrible describing this book, but basically this is a book where there is this magic school and this magic world that is kind of hidden from the real world, and our main character knows about it because her sister is magic, whereas she herself is not. A murder ends up taking place at the magic school her sister works for, and so the main character ends up being enlisted to find out what happened because she is a private detective. I'm not gonna lie, because I read this at the beginning of the month, I don't totally remember all my thoughts on it. I probably should have written them down. I read about half this book in physical form, and then the other half I listened to an audiobook. I actually really like the audiobook. That is rare for me. I'm not huge on audiobooks, but this one I found worked pretty well. I remember enjoying the romance in here. It's not a huge part of the story, but the interactions they did have, I liked. I didn't love the mystery because it felt a little bit obvious, and it wasn't like it was obvious because they did a bad job at hiding it. It was more like they just weren't trying to hide it. Honestly, my main criticism with this was the writing. It's not like it was badly written, but it very much felt like a debut, despite the fact that I don't know that it is. It says it's a debut, but I know that this writer has other books out there, so it's probably just like their debut published work, maybe? I don't know. But it felt like a debut the way it was written. And I'm holding it upside down. I have the cover on upside down. Okay. I think my main criticism is that I liked the world, I liked the characters, I just didn't like the mystery. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars, and there are other books by Sarah Gailey I want to read, so it's not like this was so bad that I would never read anything else from them. I totally will. It just like wasn't my favorite thing ever. And clearly it didn't stick with me because I barely remember anything from this. The next thing I read was a semi-definitive list of worst nightmares by Krystal Sutherland. So I listened to this, I think, entirely on audiobook. This is about a teenage girl who is from a family who is cursed to die by their phobias. I honestly didn't think I was going to enjoy this as much as I did. I will say that it very much feels like a certain type of subgenre in the YA category, and I don't know how to explain that, but like there's just like a certain formula I feel like somehow to make up a YA book, and this is what comes of it. Just like the girl with the quirky family who's like not always around and is somewhat toxic to her. Not the Manic Pixie Dream girl, but like Manic Pixie Dream student love interest who just like gives them meaning to their life. It was all just very quirky, but I enjoyed it. I liked part of the message it was trying to get across about family. I actually really liked that. I felt like it was different than a lot of the other books I've read that are like this. I feel like I've read a lot of books like this. That's the only problem, and I'm not sure that this one sticks out, but I did enjoy it and I gave it 3.5 stars. The next book I read was Wilder Girls by Rory Power, and I enjoyed this so much. I just found the atmosphere so enveloping, and like I loved that. I really enjoyed the teenage longing and the female-female relationship. I loved the friend dynamic. I just really love so much about this, and I know everyone says it's like a female Lord of the Flies, and it definitely does have some of that vibe. I did not like Lord of the Flies, whereas I did not like Lord of the Flies, but I really enjoyed this. And I do feel like maybe that's because it was a little turned down. Like, Lord of the Flies was just so much violence all the time, and like, you know, the message it was trying to get across wasn't great, whereas I feel like this one's a little more realistic. I will say, I don't know why everyone is so upset about the ending. I thought for sure that it was gonna end up like cutting off in the middle of a paragraph or something, because a lot of this book actually starts in like the middle of sentences and stuff. Like, it's written very uniquely and differently, and so that's what I thought it was going to end, like just like somehow right in the middle of a paragraph. And I mean, it's not. It just has a regular open ending. Like, if you've seen an open ending before, this is just like the generic version of an open ending, and that's not like a complaint against it. I liked it perfectly fine. I'm not upset at the ending whatsoever. I really liked the book overall. I gave it 4 stars. I will read more from Rory Power in the future. I just really like this book, and I don't know, I'm just confused, I guess, at like why people don't like it. I also didn't think the body horror was that bad. I know everyone's like stressed how bad it is. Maybe like I'm just too desensitized by watching horror movies that I'm just like, eh. I will say the only issue I had with it was like certain moments of teen angst or whatever. Like, they'd be fighting at the most inopportune times, and I'm like, what are you doing? No human would be fighting at this exact moment. You can do this later. I don't know, but that's just like teen melodrama bullshit. And luckily, I feel like it had the right amount of it where it wasn't too overbearing, so. The next book I read was Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. I listened to this on audiobook. I liked this, but I didn't love it. You know, and that has more to do with me than the book itself, because I just got like bored of it halfway through. Like, I was really enjoying the first half, but then the second half I was just like, okay, like, I get it. The world sucks for women. You know, I didn't really know what else to say about this, because I do feel like it was so data driven and like lack of data. I mean, it all just came down to like, oh, we don't have enough data for this, and therefore there are huge gaps in functionality in women's lives. And I mean, it was just like that in every single chapter, so it just got a bit repetitive, and yeah. I definitely think it's interesting and frustrating when you're thinking about like, why wouldn't everybody want to fix this, considering, as they keep mentioning, like, it doesn't just make women's lives better, it makes the entire world better for everyone. But yeah, it was just, it got to be kind of like sitting in like in a science class or a history class or something, and I was just a little bit bored. So I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. But if it's something that interests you, then you should read it. I just feel like I need a little more personal anecdotes, I guess, in my nonfiction, or some emotion in my nonfiction, I guess. Next thing I read was Make Me Yours, Evermore by Cari Silverwood. I think I've been calling her Carly in my last couple wrap-ups, so that's unfortunate. This is the 3rd book in a smutty novella series, or maybe just smutty novel series. I think they're like over 200 pages, so. The first book in this series I absolutely loved. I felt like it was always like ratcheting up things and making the sexual activities more and more interesting and pushing the boundaries more and more. Whereas after the first book, I went on to read the second book because I was super excited for it, and it just didn't do the same thing for me, because I felt like it was just a copy of the first book. And the third book was kind of the same. I just felt like it was nothing new or interesting. Had to do with this guy who kidnaps this switch from their like play club, and his friend ends up like barging in on their kidnapping activities, and they all 3 kind of start up a relationship together, and then they also get like kind of stuck with this like human trafficking ring sort of, and it goes on from there, which makes it sound really interesting, but personally I just like wasn't that into it. There was like one scene that was hot and I remember it, but everything else was just like entirely forgettable, and I kind of had to drag myself to the end. There's still 2 more books in the series that I'll probably read, because I think they're available for free on Kindle Unlimited, but I'm not super stoked about it. The next book I read was The Dare by Harley Laroux. So I saw this on Chelsea Darling-Marie's channel. I think she was reading for Readathon, and it sounded super interesting, so I picked it up. This is a smutty novella. This is a smutty novella about 2 kids, I guess they're not kids, they're probably like in their 20s, and they show up to this party and they know each other from high school. They used to make fun of each other, so it's sort of like a lovers or enemies to lovers sort of situation. And he's like the town outcast and she's like the head cheerleader type. And it involves them playing beer pong and her having to be his slave for the rest of the night. And there's some like humiliation kink in there, and that's something like I haven't gotten to read a ton about, which I enjoy. So I decided to pick this up. I enjoyed it, but I wish I had gone farther, which is kind of the complaint I have about all smut. like if you're gonna be out there, then just be like really out there. Like if you're gonna cross the line, cross it, like go. Like I just want more. And that's how this one was too. I mean, it was a little bit like unbelievable and a bit like ridiculous, but I'm okay with that. That doesn't really bother me. The writing was not anything phenomenal. It definitely felt like this was a new writer, but it wasn't so bad that it was deterring from reading it or from giving it or from enjoying it. I gave it 3 stars. I want to find more smut in this humiliation genre, but I'm not sure if I'd read anything from this person again, although like I'm not so upset by the writing that I wouldn't either. The next thing I read was Animal Farm by George Orwell. So this is about a bunch of farm animals who revolt against their farmer owner person. It actually felt like it was being told like a fairy tale at the beginning, which was kind of interesting and made me enjoy it more than I probably would have otherwise. I did weirdly find it a little bit repetitive, which is ridiculous considering it's under 100 pages, so how could it get repetitive? But it does. And I feel like it really like beats you over the head with like an anti-communism message, and it gets a little annoying. But I get it, power corrupts, absolutely, and all that shit. But yeah, I mean, I gave it 4 stars. It's probably more of a 3.5. I'm not like in love with it, but I'm glad I read it, I guess. And then the last thing I read for the month of April was Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. So I read half of this physically and then I listened to the other half on ebook, then I listened to the other half on audiobook. I wish I had read the entire thing physically because I find that this was very confusing to hear over audiobook. This is kind of a retelling of Scooby-Doo. It involves this group of kids that used to solve mysteries back in the day, and now they've grown up and things have changed and they have to come together to kind of resolve a case that they solved in their youth, but they think that something was wrong and that the real situation wasn't the person they sent to jail. I was really, really loving the half I read physically. Like I just really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the vibe. I don't know, I had low expectations for this going in for some reason, and I feel like it delivered more than I was expecting it to. But then when I started listening to it, it just got really confusing and the pacing was really off. Like I kept thinking things were about to end when they weren't. I once again enjoyed the kind of like angsty longing of the female-female relationship in this, very similar to Wilder Girl in that sense. I enjoyed some of the like quirky writing anecdotes that this writer had, like the way that he would describe this one character's hair as if it had a life of its own. That was super cute. I liked some of the supernatural elements going on in this book, but I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars because, like I said, a lot of it got very confusing and I just didn't love it as much as I probably would have if I had read it physically. Maybe one day I'll go back and try it again. I also think that like Scooby-Doo was never like my personal thing. It was never something I was obsessed with or anything, so I think if I had that connection to it, I would probably love this more because I would probably understand more of the I'd probably understand more of the throwbacks to it and more of the references to the show. But yeah, still gave it 4 out of 5 stars because I did enjoy it. Those were the books I read for April. Anyways, I hope you'll like this video and I hope you'll come back in soon. Bye.